Think for a second of something you know nothing about. Physics, architecture, business, the history of park benches. Now imagine that for some reason you felt an incessant urge to learn all there is to know about one of these topics. Well, the good news for you is that we live in an age where the amount of knowledge readily available on any of these topics is enough to fill 100 lifetimes. The bad news for you is you only have one. Now let's say you do devote your one life to studying one of these topics. At the end of your life, even if you become the world's preeminent expert on one minuscule branch of one of them, which is the best you can hope for, honestly, does that leave you with any real understanding of life, the universe, and everything? It's an easy trap to fall into, the trap of constantly acquiring knowledge yet never acquiring wisdom. Thus, the wisest among us must accept that we can never truly know anything. Siddhartha, the titular character in Herman Hesse's 1922 novel, understands this truth from the outset. Quote, "I have always thirsted for knowledge. I have always been full of questions. I have spent a long time, and I have still not finished learning, O Govinda, that one can learn nothing." And while this realization might sound like wisdom itself, it doesn't save him from a life of suffering, depravity, temptation, self-hatred, and shame. But ultimately, it is just these tribulations and Siddhartha's overcoming of them that leads to his salvation, his awakening, and his peace. Siddhartha is a book that can speak to you wherever you are in life. I recently brought this book to a book club where the prompt was pick a character that you identify with. And the first question I got was, which Siddhartha are you choosing? What he meant is, Siddhartha is in a constant state of change, of growth, of learning, and of self-realization, to the point that he seems a different person entirely at various stages on his life path. Quote, "Ridiculous is this path. It loops around. It may even go in circles. May it go where it will. Wherever it goes, I will follow." Siddhartha waxes poetic about his rejection of teachings and knowledge, but don't get the wrong idea, he learns plenty. But the sources of his learning are not what you'd expect. He learns from his courtesan lover, his greedy business partner, his hedonistic gambling friends, and most of all from a ferryman and the river that he works on. Of the spiritual teachings of the Brahmins and even the Buddha himself, however, Siddhartha does not find wisdom. My interpretation of Siddhartha is not to reject learning in any form. Rather, it is to allow the world, to allow art, literature, film, politics, history, conversation, and nature to teach you, but not to seek knowledge from them. There's so much knowledge and wisdom out there, and I find it incredibly exciting, but also suffocating. Siddhartha reminds me of the power of slowing down, of letting go of seeking, and in so doing, finding whatever life has to teach me. To quote Lao Tzu, "When nothing is done, nothing is left undone." A core belief of the Indian spirituality from which Siddhartha draws influence is the self and the universe being intertwined. In Hinduism, the realization of this truth is called Atman, a word that also refers to the eternal core or innermost essence of an individual, in Sanskrit, the self. Quote, "And where was Atman to be found? Where did he abide? Where did his eternal heart beat? Where else but within one's own eye? Deep inside, in what is indestructible, born within every individual." Siddhartha's quest is essentially this process of finding Atman, though his self goes through many transformations. At the book's beginning, he thinks he knows Atman, and even criticizes the Brahmin priests who, quote, "knew infinitely much, but was there value in knowing everything if one did not know the one and only thing, the single most important thing, the only thing that matters?" Born of this frustration and a wish to seek Atman and conquer his I, Siddhartha leaves home and his high status to join a group of ascetic nomads who deprive themselves of all material goods. Upon experiencing reality, he is sickened. Quote, "It all stank of lies. It all feigned significance, good fortune, and beauty. And it was all unavowed putrefaction. The taste of the world was bitter. Life was affliction." 3 years later, Siddhartha and his friend Govinda leave the ascetics after hearing tales of the Buddha. They find him and sample his teachings, but Siddhartha decides that they are still not enough, for any teaching will ultimately pale in comparison to the truth one can find through one's own experience. Quote, "But one thing the teachings, so clear and so venerable, do not contain. They do not contain the secret of what the Exalted One himself experienced, he alone among the hundreds of thousands." So Siddhartha ventures out on his own, realizing that in his relentless searching, his desire to conquer his I, he had lost himself. In abjugating himself from this seeking, the beauty and harmony of the world opens up to him. Quote, "Meaning in essence were not somewhere behind things, they were inside things, in everything." He declares that it is in the school of himself that he wants to learn, and it's here that part 1 of the book concludes. Siddhartha's realization, which becomes fully realized later in the book, shows the power of a contemplative aspect of life that's sorely missing in today's world. We are faced with tremendous challenges and a rapid descent into catastrophe. So our natural response, those of us who want change, is to rush into frenzied activity to try and fix the problem. But in foregoing contemplation, mindfulness, and discipline, our action is disorganized, half-crazed, and ineffective. I received a couple comments on my Kendrick video where I concluded that mindfulness and meditation are ways to escape ambition. They basically said that this was an individualistic non-solution that is capitalized by gurus and the neoliberal society that I was critiquing. They made some interesting points, but overall I disagree with the premise. An investigation into the self, when one understands the interconnectedness of the self in the universe, is not individualistic, quite the opposite. In the words of Indian philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti, "Your brain and your consciousness are shared by all human beings, so you are the rest of mankind. This is not an intellectual concept, it is not an idea, something romantic or sentimental, it is a fact. When that is deeply real, when that is the truth, then your whole outlook on life changes. Then you are responsible for all humanity. It is rather frightening, but it is so." By the way, if you need some kind of scientific proof of this, just look at quantum physics. Contemplation opens up the ability to see how reliant we are on our beliefs, our knowledge, and the way our brain has been conditioned to treat life as a problem to be solved. It allows us to reunite with nature, to break from the cult of the self, to experience the radiance of life. We'd all like to think that we are above indoctrination or manipulation, but if you look deeply, you'll find that you are conditioned just like your Trump-supporting uncle, only in different ways. Contemplation is only one aspect of working towards change. This I understand. Conversation, education, solidarity, and collective action are also needed. But I believe that in order to really understand the problems we face and be organized with real solutions, contemplation is essential. In the book of Chuang-Tzu, Chuang-Tzu tells a story of a master cook butchering an oxen. The cook is a master of inactivity. He practices doing nothing. Rather than willfully intervening in things, he makes use of the possibilities that lie dormant in them. The cook effortlessly carves up the oxen, rarely needing to move his knife, but by the end of his patient, deliberate process, flop! The whole thing comes apart like a clod of earth crumbling to the ground. This is the inactivity that Byung-Chul Han refers to in Vida Contemplativa as, quote, "not a weakness or defect, but rather an intensity. which is neither seen nor acknowledged in our active and performance-driven society. He says this activity and action are blind to the truth. They only touch the surface of things. Hands that are determined to act will not find the key to truth. That key falls into the hands of the sleeper. Siddhartha will eventually realize this truth, but as Byung-Chul Han would predict, the key falls into his hands when he's sleeping. Siddhartha's awakening that ended part 1 turns out to be short-lived, as in the very next chapter he meets and becomes infatuated with a beautiful courtesan named Kamala, and begins a life of material wealth and excess to please her. In this life of worldly desire, he becomes slowly seized by the spiritual malaise of the rich, wrapped in small pleasures like gambling on dice, alcohol, grand feasts, lust, and power, content yet never satisfied. Siddhartha finds disturbingly that the inner voice that had guided him during his times of resplendence had gone silent. He's become enslaved by the vices which he had once scorned: desire, covetousness, lassitude, and even avarice. He wishes to dispose of these indulgences, these customs, this entire senseless life, and himself along with it in one tremendous swell of disgust. In his disgust, Siddhartha leaves behind this world of luxury, never to return. He roams the forest, half-crazed and suicidal, at a crisis of identity. It is in this moment of crisis that the holy word, Om, returns to his lips, and, quote, he knew of the indestructibility of life, knew again of everything divine, which he had forgotten, but it was only a flash. Muttering Om, he falls into a long, deep sleep, and when he wakes he finds Govinda watching over his sleep. After telling Govinda the story of his life as a rich man, Govinda asks, "And now what are you?" To which Siddhartha replies, "I do not know. I know as little as you. I am underway. I was a rich man, and I no longer am. And what I shall be tomorrow I do not know." Govinda and Siddhartha say farewell, and Siddhartha reflects on his life until this point. But what a path it has been. I have had to endure so much stupidity, so many burdens, so much error, so much disgust and disappointment and misery, simply to become a child again and to be able to begin fresh. But it was rightly so. My heart affirms it. My eyes laugh at it. I had to experience despair. I had to sink down to the most misguided of all thoughts, to the thought of suicide, in order to experience grace, again to perceive the Om, again to sleep well and properly awaken. I had to become a fool in order to again find Atman within myself. I had to sin to be able to live again. Where else may this path lead me? Ridiculous is this path. It loops around. It may even go in circles. May it go where it will. Wherever it goes, I will follow. This is the passage that I chose to read in the book group I mentioned earlier. It speaks quite poignantly to the fact that we all make mistakes, some quite grave and detrimental, and it's so easy to fall into a spiritual malaise, unable to escape our bad habits. I can't say that I was ever suicidal like Siddhartha, but I've had very low moments and used alcohol, sports gambling, and constant entertainment to distract myself. I think that the biggest problem in our current mental health crisis is that we don't allow ourselves to sit with negative emotions. We escape from reality to technological worlds of infinite content and find sweet distraction from our problems in them. I can tell you with 100% certainty that it was only once I started addressing these negative emotions in therapy that I was able to overcome them. I was able to recognize how I used alcohol, TikTok, gambling, television, and self-isolation as a means of escaping the pain, but it only made me more miserable. It's funny, I remember during these therapy sessions how big a worry my productivity at work was. I constantly felt guilty and ashamed of not getting enough done. I mean, think about that. Here I am struggling with depression, and my main concern is how I'm not bringing enough value to the corporation that I worked for. Something about capitalism. 6 months after starting therapy, I decided to quit that job, and I embarked on a 3-month road trip across the US. I connected with nature and with myself. I had nothing to do, nowhere to be, nobody to report to, and it was pure bliss. I know that not everybody is able to do this, and I feel very fortunate that I was. But those 3 months taught me how important inactivity and stillness are. And I'd encourage you to think about ways that you can incorporate stillness and nature into your life, in smaller ways perhaps than what I did. Quote, "Without stillness, there is no music, just sound and noise." Today I can look back on that dark time in my life with gratitude, because all the pain, suffering, and self-overcoming were necessary steps to reach the place that I am today. That's not to say everything is perfect and dandy, but I do feel more resilient and really like an entirely different person than I was even 5 years ago. Siddhartha, too, understands that each step on his journey, the arrogant intellectuality of his youth as a Brahmin, the self-mortification of his ascetic years, the greed and barrenness of his life as a rich man, had been necessary to achieve this final step, to kill the avaricious voluptuary's Siddhartha, so that the new Siddhartha could be born. So now seems about as good a time as any to announce that there will be a 2025 book club, the first annual Stories We Tell book club. We're going to be reading the Tao Te Ching. So that's going on my Substack. I've already got the first post up on there, so you can check it out. I'll link it below. You can read about my deconstructing my Catholic trauma growing up, so that's super fun. I hope so far the video has been enjoyable. I won't delay too much further, but I do want to say please be sure to leave a like, leave a comment. It really does help. We're controlled by robots and algorithms. Okay, I'll come back to you at the end with a little bit more. In his introduction to my edition of Siddhartha, Robert Thurman says that Friedrich Nietzsche initially planned on using the Buddha instead of the Persian prophet Zoroaster, or Zarathustra, as his protagonist in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, but dropped the idea because he found German translation of Buddhist Pali scriptures too world-negating and otherworldly, and not strongly life-affirming enough. Thurman says that, like Zarathustra, Hesse's story of Siddhartha turns away from the perception in Europe at the time of the Buddha's story as pious, world-renouncing, and monastic. To be clear, this is just one Western interpretation of Buddhism from the 19th century. But all the same, Nietzsche and Hesse both turned away from it. What we end up with is a final message similar, but with key differences to Nietzsche's Amor Fati, literally love of one's fate, but more accurately, affirmation of life. In Nietzsche's words from The Gay Science, quote, "I want to learn more and more to see as beautiful what is necessary in things. Then I shall be one of those who makes things beautiful. Amor Fati, let that be my love henceforth. I do not want to wage war against what is ugly. I do not want to accuse. I do not even want to accuse those who accuse. Looking away shall be my only negation, and all in all and on the whole, someday I wish only to be a yes-sayer." Siddhartha overall affirms this philosophy, vows to learn to love the world, to learn no longer to compare it to the world I desired and imagined, to some preconceived sort of perfection, rather to leave it as it is, to love it, and to enjoy belonging to it. But while similar, Zarathustra and Siddhartha are not perfect mirrors of each other. A key distinction of Nietzsche's Amor Fati that is unique to Zarathustra is his embracing of one's so-called evil impulses and desires. He calls out sensual pleasures, lust for power, and selfishness, and goes on a tangent to prove these healthy and holy. He declares those who suppress and negate these impulses as cowardly, and spits at their sham wisdom and world weariness. He calls on his disciples to embrace their bestowing virtue, their will to power, which aspires insatiably after treasures and jewels, because their bestowing virtue is insatiable in wanting to give. His meaning essentially is life should be affirmed, warts and all. And by negating undesirable impulses, you are only conforming to the weakness of the masses. Quote, "This glorious selfishness regards as baser, yet him who is quick to please, who, dog-like, lies upon his back, the humble man." From these passages, we start to understand Nietzsche's ultimate rejection of Buddhism, which says that the root of suffering is tanha, or worldly desire arising from ignorance and delusion. Though it should be said, suppression of these desires is not said to be the way out of suffering, a common misunderstanding. It's said that the way out is through the Eightfold Path. It's unclear if Nietzsche understood this distinction, but regardless, I do agree that Buddhism and Nietzsche's Amor Fati are not completely compatible. One interesting similarity, though, is the eternal recurrence, which Zarathustra uses as a metaphor for life affirmation, but is really a core belief of Buddhism. In essence, if the universe, and therefore your life, were to repeat itself over and over and over again into eternity, would you affirm the choices you made? Say yes to life? Be happy to live your life as it is repeatedly? Overall, though I have my disagreements, I do find Amor Fati compelling. And I think that Siddhartha mostly encapsulates this life-affirming process, though with perhaps a more compassionate lens. I think even Nietzsche would agree with that. Amor Fati is about creating your own meaning. It's about affirming life in all its complexity and contradictions, affirming your desires, whatever they may be, and selecting whether you wish to pursue them based on the meaning or values you've created. So when Siddhartha speaks regretfully on his great need to sin, to seek pleasure, to strive for possessions, to be indolent, and a need for the most shameful despair, it doesn't negate Amor Fati. The very fact that he pursued his sensual pleasures, lust for power, and selfishness supports this claim in a way. There's a lot more nuance to Nietzsche's argument that I can't possibly capture here, so I'd encourage to read him for yourself and draw your own conclusions. In the final act of the book, Siddhartha returns to the river where he had previously met a ferryman, and he becomes friends with the man. His name is Vasudeva, and Siddhartha learns more from him and from the river on which they ferry passengers than he could from any teachings. Quote, "Above all, he learned how to listen, to hearken with a quiet heart, with a soul that waited, open, without passion, without desire, without judgment, without opinion." But he still had not given up on his seeking, just as his tribulations are not finished. One day, Kamala shows up, having become ill on a trip to find the Buddha. She brings her son, a child conceived with Siddhartha just before he left. The boy has been sheltered, spoiled, and grows to hate Siddhartha. Despite this, Siddhartha learns the blind love for a son, a blindness he had once criticized in the so-called child people. And this causes him to, quote, "look at people differently than he did before, less cleverly, less proudly, and thus with greater warmth." These people did not seem as alien to him as they once did. But after Kamala's death, their son, angry and frustrated, runs away, presumably to Kamala's home where servants will cater to his every wish. Siddhartha had tried time and again to teach his son the errors of this lifestyle, but he would not listen. Vasudeva tells Siddhartha that he must discover, learn, grow, and hopefully reach that conclusion on his own, as Siddhartha did. But it cannot be forced on him. When Siddhartha lets go of his son, he at last finds peace and understanding. He at last gives up his seeking, puts his ego to bed, and begins to truly listen. And everything together, all the voices, all the goals, all the yearning, all the suffering, all the desire, everything good and evil, everything all together was the world. Everything all together was the flow of events, was the music of life. Having come to peace with the ridiculous path that his life has been, he has one final run-in with Govinda, who has never stopped seeking, even after the Buddha's death. Siddhartha tells him that this seeking attitude is preventing him from finding. Quote, "When someone seeks, then it happens all too easily that his eyes will see only the thing he is seeking, that he cannot find anything, cannot let anything in, because he is always thinking only of that thing he seeks. Because he has a goal, because he is possessed by the goal. Seeking means having a goal, but finding means being free, being open, having no goal." Govinda is initially confused. How has Siddhartha found such peace and tranquility through no doctrine, no creed, no teacher? But he recognizes the truth in Siddhartha's peace, and the lack of his own. A lifetime of seeking has blinded him from a deeper, more true connection with the world and the universe. In the words of Siddhartha, "The wisdom a sage attempts to convey always sounds like folly." This is what I mean by knowledge versus wisdom. Wisdom cannot be taught. It's esoteric, it's inactive. Only in inactivity do we become aware of the ground on which we rest and of the space in which we are. Life enters the contemplative mode and swings back to its secret foundation in being. It finds itself and looks at itself. It reaches its deep immanence. Only inactivity initiates us to the secret of life. So often today, people look to others for answers. People turn to religion for answers about the mysteries of life, to scientists for answers about how the world works, to philosophers for answers on how to live, to, God forbid, politicians for answers on how to fix our society. We want to put other people, ourselves, our thought, and reality itself into a box, a neatly wrapped box with a bow and a ribbon that we can present to the world and say, "Here, this is what I think." In doing this, we are denying the nuance and complexity of the world. We are denying the chance to arrive at wisdom and instead feeling content with knowledge. So if you want wisdom, stop looking. I'll close with a quote from Marcel Proust. "But it is sometimes just at the moment when we think that everything is lost, that the intimation arrives which may save us. One has knocked at all the doors which lead nowhere, and then one stumbles without knowing it on the only door through which one can enter, which one might have sought in vain for 100 years, and it opens of its own accord." Alrighty, folks, before you click onto the next video, I want to invite you to take a mindful pause with me. Think about what you just watched. Take a page out of Byung-Chul Han's contemplation playbook, if you will. I think that there's a tendency to kind of just rush through content consumption, overconsumption for sure. It's a problem. And I want my videos to be a safe haven from all that. So we're going to take a pause on 3, think about the video, or think about the book if you've read it. Whatever you want. Just take some time. Be still with your thoughts. All right, so 1, 2, 3. So I'm reading Orientalism right now by Edward Said, and I just started it, but I do want to mention that the fact that Herman Hesse is a German and I am an American. We're both white guys talking about, Indian spirituality. So I hope that it was respectful and true to the source material. But if you found anything wrong with what I did, please let me know in the comments. Okay, shout outs and closeouts. Horses. Have you guys heard of the YouTube channel Horses? If you have and watched his videos before, you might have gotten a little deja vu. I was sort of inspired by his style. I wanted to try it out for myself, and this seemed like a good avenue for it since it's like an older classic novel. Check out my Instagram, at the stories we tell 303. Substack I mentioned. We're going to be doing Dao De Jing read along, but I also do other writings about whatever's on my mind. I've got a post in the works about Bon Iver's new EP, and I'll also share some of my year-end lists of top books and things like that. I'm working on a longer or more in-depth and researched video about the Israeli genocide of Palestinians and about media propaganda. It's probably going to end up being 2 parts, but that's why it's been a little while. So if you appreciate the effort and time that I put in to these videos, you can support me. The easy way to do it is like, share, subscribe, obviously, and comment. But you can also financially support me. I'll leave my tip jar. You can also be a paid subscriber on Substack, and that will give me some extra cash to really put more energy and time into this, which I hope to be doing in the future. It's been very busy with my full-time job. Yeah, that's all I got. As always, peace and love, and I'll see you next time.